Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Cup Reviews, brought to you by Cup of Hemlock Theatre. I am your host and marketing manager, Mackenzie, and I am thrilled tonight to be welcoming a number of returning guests as well as some new guests to our review panel tonight. We are going to be talking about the John Logan play, Red, which you can be found on Broadway HD, which going forward is where we will be getting our recordings from. This production starred Alfred Molina as Rothko and How to Get Away with Murder star Alfred Enoch as Ken. So we'll be talking all about this play tonight, but on our panel today, we have our production manager, Mr. Edmund Clark. Hello, Ed. What's in your cup today?
Hello, everyone. Glad to be back. I think this is probably the first time people have seen me close to clean shaven. I think usually I have a beard or something on here. Anyway, I have cherry limeade in my cup. And in case you wanted to see the color of that, you can see it's a bit red.
It's red.
Like the title.
Beautiful. So yeah, and the shirt.
Yeah.
So great to be back. Hello, everyone.
Hello. Wonderful. Next, we have our literary manager, as well as resident dramaturg, Mr. Ryan Borochovitz. Hello, Ryan.
Hello, Mac. Always a pleasure.
Yes. What is in your cup today, and what is your ensemble?
Okay, well, I'll start with the ensemble. So usually Jill is the one who brings the A game for costumes on these panels. So yes, she's not here. It's my time to shine. But then Ed beat me to it with the mostly red shirt. But yes, I'm wearing a red T-shirt underneath a black shirt because much like the later paintings in this play, the black is overtaking the red. I picked a kind of vaguely black mug to drink orange pico tea, which is the closest to red you're going to get in my tea cupboard.
Wonderful. And we have a new guest to our reviews, but he has been part of our interview series. Actually, he was part of the inaugural episode of our interview series with Ryan.
Oh, yeah.
We have the wonderful Max Ackerman. Hello, Max.
Hey, thank you guys so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be back.
Yes, thank you so much for coming on for this wonderful play. And what is in your cup today?
I went just a little bit more boring, but I had a long shift at work today, so I just made a nice soothing green tea. I thought it would be nice to chat some theater and sip on some green tea. I didn't plan ahead as well as these other gentlemen. I sort of am in Rothko's proverbial black right now, and it's sort of, we've got the gradient, I guess, as it were. Going
we do see a red rose back there.
That's a good Bread and Puppet plug right
you.
there. Yeah. No, I got you. I appreciate it.
Wonderful. And today I am dressed in the black with my red hair, so see, I still got the black and the red going. And I think it's important to also represent the black in the art. I mean, yes, this play is called Red, but black plays a very important key role within this play. So the black had to be represented, so black suit. And I'm pleased to say I'm drinking my cup of Earl Grey tea from my official brand new piece of Cup of Hemlock mug. So if you'd like your own, let us know. We do have them.
It's a beautiful mug.
We have merch, and officially on the other side, as the host of the cup.
Is this?
That's the show we're on right now.
Holy
exactly.
Moses.
What a meta moment.
If there was ever a cup to buy, it would be that cup.
Yes,
it would be the cup.
Do you ever just look at your cup and be like, what is this thing called, and wish it just said it right on there? Well, fret not, citizen.
Exactly. Cup of Hemlock has you covered with the official The Cup mug.
That's so funny.
Yes. Yes, but here we go. Okay. So let's dive into this play. Now, in case you don't know, we're shaking up our first question a little bit because unlike our past productions where there have been a plethora of cast members to choose from in this show, this play is a two-hander, meaning there's only two people on stage the entire time. So we're actually going to give each of them a bit of a highlight because that's only fair. Because they're both fantastic in this roles that they've done. So we're going to start off with the wonderful Alfred Molina as Rothko. What are our thoughts on Mr. Molina himself, Mr. Dr. Octavius from Spider-Man?
Yeah, I was gonna say, yeah.
I saw him on the stage and I was like, "Is that Doc Ock?"
That's for sure Doc Ock. He looks like him. He's like Rothko is a bit of a Doc Ock character in a lot of ways. That I mean, I just love him. Like, I think he's such a wonderful actor. I mean, his Tevye is iconic.
Oh, thank
obviously.
you for mentioning his Tevye.
Yeah, well, like, and I think that what Molina has, I mean, on one side of the thing is it's really nice to see a Jewish actor playing a Jewish character, because there's a certain, essence there that might not necessarily be there. And I think that he captures, Ken describes Rothko as rabbinical, which I think is actually really poignant. And because Molina does have a real rabbinical quality, he's really intense, really harsh, but he's got such a tender side to him as well that when that tenderness shines through, it makes me want to root for that, as opposed to all of the asshole stuff that Rothko does. Am I allowed to curse on the show?
You get one F-bomb. This is a PG-13 show, so you can steal it now.
You got kids watching the Cup.
Yeah.
Exactly.
But yeah, I'm a huge fan of Molina. I think he's a wonderful actor, and I think he does a great job in this. Genuinely, I think he does. Yeah.
Yes, he really does. He steals the show. I mean, he's the only carryover from the original production. For those of you who don't know, Alfred Enoch is not the OG Ken. In fact, it is Mr. Oscar winner Eddie Redmayne who originated the role of Ken.
I don't think you can spell his last name without red.
Ooh. That's why he was cast. That's why they cast him. There was no audition.
That's the only qualification I would need.
Exactly. Ed, what do you think of Mr. Alfred Molina as Rothko in this production?
Oh, I thought it was an intense performance. Mm-hmm. That was very intense. I've never met the actual Mark Rothko, so I don't know how accurate the.
I mean, Ed, you don't have a time machine to go back in time and meet him.
I mean, I barely knew who Mark Rothko was. I mean, I knew his contemporaries, Pollock and whatnot, but no, it was a very intense performance, and I mean, it was full of reds, like all the different shades of reds. That's all I was when I was seeing it. That's what I was noticing. There were overall the portrayal was great. I thought it was enjoyable. I thought it was digestible. I thought I would want to be in this play, and I would want to be that character. Yeah. And I have to commend him on that. It was one of those plays for me that I just sat and watched the entire thing and heard it all. Really let it take me. And I am not a huge fan of abstract expressionism. Actually, I'm not a fan at all of abstract expressionism.
I'm with you, Ed.
Yeah, but it was what they like, how I guess Rothko thought of art was noble, and I think Mr. Molina really brought that out.
Yeah.
Now, if I were to give him some critiques, which I surely will, there's moments where he's just angry right off the bat and has nothing to build on. And those moments, I'm like, oh, it could have been so pristine. And then at times it can be a bit predictable, where I think didn't Ken call him predictable? Or no,
yes.
He called him. Yeah, he called him predictable. Oh, wow.
During I think it's during the nice debate where they're talking about art being nice.
Yeah.
And the whole concept of like, does art always have to rip your heart out, or can it be fine? Can it be good? Can it be nice? I think during that debate, Ken brings up you're just as predictable as you proclaim not to be with all the other artists. I think that's where that moment comes in.
And you know what? With Molina's portrayal, I thought that, like, my thoughts towards that movement and its leaders, I thought, they are people that very much take themselves seriously, and maybe a bit over the edge.
Yeah.
But there's some technical things with the performance, but it didn't take away from my enjoyment of it. It didn't take away from what was being told and what was being brought out. So that's
Wonderful.
That's my take on that.
Wonderful. Ryan, what were your thoughts on Mr. Alfred Molina?
I'm gonna start by having to disagree with you about not about Molina being amazing, because of course that is the thesis of where I'm going here. But no, this is his show. He owns the stage every moment he's on it, and even moments when he's not, few and far between as they are.
Mm-hmm.
And I honestly have no critique of it. To your point, Ed, though, about that I don't see the fact that he starts angry and intense as a flaw. I think it actually gives us great moments throughout this performance when he does soften, because I see the anger as the performance that Rothko is putting on, not Molina specifically, but Rothko, the character, is putting on this persona of intensity, of anger, of being the smartest guy in the room. And Ken needles out the humanity in him and breaks that exterior shell that could only work if he started at 11 from the beginning. So I don't see it as a flaw in the performance. I kind of think it's part of the point here would be that, and you can disagree and you can dislike it, certainly, but...
I mean, I do disagree, but I see what you're getting at. I see the contrast between Ken and Rothko. Like, I see that even regardless of... And that's what made the performance even enjoyable. I could still see the contrast being brought out from the two characters. Mm-hmm. Even if... For me, technically, from a technical standpoint, it wasn't always as pristine or precise.
Mm-hmm. Yes. I'll say first of all, just to join on this debate, I think this debate, I think I have a reason why sometimes that comes across as a very one-note thing, and I think I'll come across in my weakest area of the production. So putting a pin in this debate, because I do have an input, but we're saving it, so stay tuned for that.
But I just think overall, sorry, just to finish my section, Mag, before we'll hear what you have to say about it.
Ryan's turn.
No, I think what I just loved about Molina is just how immersed into the role he did. Like, everything from just the tone of voice, the posture, the painting is like, and they do actual painting on stage. Like, it is just, regardless of what technique he used to bring himself to, this point where he could feel that connected to the character. Mm-hmm. I think, that is just so crucial. And something that I think goes often overlooked about Molina's career is that when he's at his best is when he's playing gross characters, which I think is interesting. Like,
that is interesting. I don't know if I would necessarily agree with that, but I do think that he is, wouldn't necessarily agree that that's always true, but he does have a certain, I don't know if I would say gross, but certainly grotesque quality to him. That is, which is so mean of me to say.
No, and that's, you're not
like, he's a beautiful guy. Like, Alfred, if you're watching this, I'm sorry, buddy. Like, I love you, and I think
it's a testament to his craft. You're not saying Molina is gross. He plays gross characters with gross characters.
He's got a transformational quality to him for sure.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Like, one of my favorite roles. Yeah, Mac.
Oh no. I would change the word gross to tyrannical. I think that's what he does really well, is whether it's Tevye, because his Tevye can become very tyrannical. It's
very intense.
Same thing with tyrannical. Like Doc Ock. Like, Doc Ock has those warm ones, but then at the same time he can be like thespian tyrannical, going, I will take apart New York City. Like, he has that wonderful tyrannical nature within him, that intensity that he can just pop out at any given moment. I think that's a way he goes about it.
See, I'm thinking of two roles in particular that he's done fairly recently that are very gross, and they're like, aside from maybe now seeing him as Rothko, they were my favorite performances he's given. One of them was it was David Simon's miniseries Show Me a Hero. I don't know if any of you watched that.
No,
I didn't. I heard it.
Okay.
I heard it was
good. It was fantastic. I would recommend it to anyone. If you like The Wire, it's David Simon. Molina played our main character is played by Oscar Isaac, and Molina played his political rival in municipal government in Yonkers, New York. And man, was he sleazy in it. And he was just like so gross. He always had like a toothpick hanging out of his mouth. He was, he thinks everyone thinks they're better than me. Like, and it was just like, you could feel the grease kind of like emanating off of him as the sleazy politician, who was based on a real person. I think Henry Spallone, his name was. And I like, that was like a terrifying performance. And he's like kind of a tertiary character in that entire series. And the other one that really stood out recently is, if any of you saw The Front Runner, the Gary Hart movie.
Yes, with Hugh Jackman.
But yeah, with Hugh Jackman as Gary Hart. And Molina played Washington Post editor Ben Bradley, who 1 year prior was played by Tom Hanks in The Post.
Right.
And while Tom Hanks played this very like debonair professional, I am a newsman and I care about the truth, Bradley played Bradley played by Molina was the gross, like very like skeevy. He
Cool.
told all these stories about how the journalists all had to turn a blind eye to Kennedy's philandering and not report on that. Like, and
so funny.
it really just kind of, I think he does with that role the same thing that he's done with Rothko here. Not that we have all these cinematic or theatrical legacies of how we view Rothko, but it is taking this myth of a great figure in their field and revealing that through their humanity, they are maybe not someone who should be revered. And I think that this performance, Red, bringing us back here, it is perfect testament to that special skill that he has, which is why I do like to compliment him for being able to play Gross so well.
Yeah, Molina definitely has that transformational quality, and I think that's something that's very hard for an actor to do, especially one who is seen on screen, where it's going from screen to stage and whatnot. It's easy to see Doc Ock, but I didn't see that at all. I didn't see that at all when I was watching it. So, definitely a great performance overall.
Yes. I'll say, for me, I love the passion Molina brought to Rothko. Like, he really brought the struggle of this character, of this man who is at the end of his career. And he's like many people in that situation who are still trying to prove something, that they're still trying to be relevant in the world. And you can see him like continually just reaching and trying, and he's frustrated. He played rudderless really well in this, where like he just couldn't figure things out. He couldn't articulate what he wanted. I don't know. He knew what he was going for, but he just couldn't get there. It was one of the things of like, I want people to be disgusted by these paintings in the Four Seasons. But I don't know how to do that anymore. People are not taking me seriously anymore. People are not getting my art. What do I have to do? And he's struggling and he's frustrated. And I love that frustration, that you could just see this man at the end trying to figure out, what am I doing?
I think that's a very interesting reading of the character. I see it almost as the opposite. I see it as a man who's totally in control of his own view of the world and his own view of art, while the rest of the world sort of spirals out of control, he might say, around him. And he's confronted with these, pop art that it's this totally, it's totally contrary to what the logic and rules and tradition of what he's grown up with. Yeah, well, I know it's a sort of funny, but like that is, I think, the essence of Rothko. Yeah. And part of the reason that it is, I think, a pretty distinctly Jewish part is that there is this core of tradition to him. I mean, really, like it's that sort of, that rabbinical nature and that's why towards the end, when I think you're right to say, he spirals out of control, but it's really that the world spirals out of control without him. And he's like, really,
in his mind, anyway. In his mind, the world is progressing forward. He is this part of the past that's still trying to be like, no, like, hold on to me a little bit, respect my contribution. Don't just what did he say about, what was it, the pointillism or the painters that came before him?
Cubism.
The Cubism people, where they kind of got rid of the Cubism people, and he's trying not to end up.
They stomped him to death.
Exactly, he's trying not to be stomped to death in this world that is literally marching ahead in time, and he is. In his mind, he's still thinking, I have the reins. I am the leader of this parade of art, but it's like, not anymore, really. The parade's kind of moving beyond you. You're not really going along with the times anymore. So Rothko was very relatable to me. I knew exactly, when I saw him do it, I was like, I know exactly where, like what this man is in the world right now.
I think
that struggle.
Just a testament to John Logan, the playwright.
Yes.
To lock in on Rothko as this kind of perfect historical turning point, or the last breath of the art that came before Warhol. And being a pioneer in its own time, but recognizing that I think what's so interesting about pop art being the form that comes to stomp him to death the same way that he stomped Cubism to death is that Rothko's able to perceive his own work as a superior form to what came before, whereas, by the very postmodern philosophy that justifies pop art, he is able to clearly recognize that this isn't a superior form, and that's kind of the point. And so this is like just such a tragic figure that I think this author was so attuned to figuring out the story that needed to be told here, and did it beautifully.
I love all the temporal themes within this piece, especially with Rothko. And please correct me if I'm wrong, but Rothko, I don't think he's a very common name that people would just kind of hear about. And now I could be wrong. I've heard Pollock
not now
hundreds of times before throughout. Yeah. So it's interesting that this play. I mean, when was this play put on?
It was premiered in 2010. I think this production was from 2018.
Yeah, so it's just like you said, Max. Not now. It's interesting that this play is being put on now, or like relatively now. And then you have all these themes like the 4 seasons from spring to winter, the series of his red paintings being put on the wall, and each one it goes from red all the way down to black. And then him talking about how he stomped out the father, and now he's about to get stomped out again, right? It's like coming to terms with that morality.
Yes.
So, just to add on to what you two were saying, it's and that performance really did bring that out, like coming to terms with your insignificance or end.
Yeah. I mean, it's a very human thing that. I mean, all of us, when we get to be older, will experience in our own time. I mean, even in the world of theater and film, I mean, actors always have these, and directors always have these big spikes in their career where they're the top of the pyramid, and then they start to peter down. I mean, Spielberg's big hype was mid-90s. He still does great work, but now.
You might offend some people with that comment.
Yeah. Oh no, I love Spielberg. Spielberg, I love watching his work. I really do. But I mean, comparing his work now to, say, in the 90s when he was the studio golden child who just got blank checks for his work.
I'd much rather watch Jurassic Park or Schindler's List or Ready Player One. Yeah, I said it.
Yeah.
Well, we need to get back to Red. I'm not gonna. That's a whole other review.
Yes. I mean, like, I am excited for Spielberg's West Side Story. I am excited for that for next year. So we'll see what happens. Either way, okay. So now we've kind of talked about Molina and Rothko. Let's flip over to the other end of this two-hander, and that is Alfred Enoch's Ken, the character who doesn't even get a name in the play. Like, it's funny. Brian pointed out to me where it's like, they actually never say his name is Ken in the entire play. You actually have to read the script to know
that's true
who this man is. Like, for the most part, he's just kind of this student. But what do we think of Alfred Enoch as Ken? Max, let's have you start this one.
I mean, I think he's obviously a very talented actor, a very well respected actor, and I see why. He didn't do it for me as much. I just felt like, from just a purely technical standpoint, that like for the first 2/3 of the play, he said he delivered every line as if it was a question, and it just sort of threw me off. I just thought his delivery was just a bit distracting at times. That being said, I thought that 2 real things, that when he got into the emotional stuff, he really did bring it, and especially when I thought he and Molina actually played really, really well off of each other, so that when we get to that big confrontation about 2/3 of the way through the play, where he actually starts fighting back against Rothko, that was a really great and compelling scene to watch, and I thought he really, I mean, like, it's really a purely technical thing, but he just sort of started hitting the ends of his lines and things like that. But so I thought that added something. But to tell you the truth, and this might sound like a slight, and I do not mean it. I mean it as a total compliment. I thought that his most compelling work was his work done in silence, which is, I think, arguably the hardest stuff to do. I thought he was and I actually noted he was an unbelievably good listener. He was, when he was listening, because Molina is such a talker, like he's such a verbal actor. It's interesting because Enoch actually isn't. Like he's really good at being the receiver of things, and I thought that was I mean, that's what Ken is in this play. Ken is in many ways the receiver of things. You know, Ken doesn't have a lot of. Ken has agency, but things happen to Ken. I think in a way that they don't for Rothko, and so on the one hand, it makes it a difficult part to play. For sure, and so credit to Enoch for doing that. But yeah, I think like my big notes are purely technical things, which, and I know like this guy's a British actor. He's a stage trained, like Emmy award winning shows. Like who the fuck am I to? That's my one.
Yeah,
remember that.
Is that when you wanted to use it?
No, it's not. He like you know what I mean though. Like I couldn't possibly like so much respect for this guy and he's obviously a wonderful actor. It's just like really I think, and this is the source of a lot of my complaints, and I know we were talking about the script before, but I'll be real, I don't think the text does him any favors, and I think that's where I think a lot of the source of those sort of critiques are. But yeah, I think that's the thesis of that is he's a better listener than he is a talker in this play. Can I jump directly onto that, Mac?
Go for it, Ryan. Piggyback in.
Max, you're feeding into something that I was going to bring up certainly here is that, yeah, I agree that the text doesn't do him a lot of favors, but I think where it does favors, where this actually feels like a richly drawn three-dimensional character, are in those moments where we see the emotion that you're pointing out when he's talking about his dead parents, when he is pushing back against Rothko in that kind of mini climax before the end. And I think like you're very apt to point out that, you know, all of his lines in the first half are questions because he is existing. And I think dramaturgically we can justify it that he is the young, naive student. He's there to learn. And he knows it's not his place. He was told not to talk really from the moment he arrived, which is why the silence is maybe so potent the way you're describing it. But I think, his job dramaturgically is to be the conduit for Rothko to speak, because this could have been a monologue, this whole play.
For sure.
and it would have been an amazing play. I could watch Alfred Molina just rant as Rothko for hours. But I think it is really in those moments near the end that he gets to shine. I feel bad kind of faulting Enoch as the actor for there not being that much on the page in those early parts, because he really does bring it when the script allows him to. I would be very curious to see the Eddie Redmayne version. Truth be told, I've never been a big fan of his.
I was gonna say he actually strikes me as a more boring actor. Like I think that like, you know, from what I've seen of Enoch, he's a very good actor, like I said, and so I agree with you 100%. I think that the script doesn't do him any favors.
Like, my favorite Eddie Redmayne role I've ever seen is when he was a claymation caveman in Early Man, if any of you saw from the Wallace and Gromit people. That's the best I've ever seen, like, or at least personally, that I've enjoyed an Eddie Redmayne performance. So, I can't imagine he would. I feel like Enoch, to me, seems like an improvement, but I cannot judge a performance I have not seen.
Ed?
So I will say first that I have no doubt that Enoch is a phenomenal actor. I haven't seen anything else other than I think he's in Harry Potter, right?
He plays Dean Thomas.
Yeah, other than Harry Potter in this. So this is
always the Harry
all
Potter
just to
actors
say.
who play this role.
Yeah. Oh yeah. But this is to say, you know, this isn't a mark of his acting in general, just this particular role. It did not land for me. Like Max was saying, everything ended on a question. There were weird phrasing of things, and I think the language was good. I think that the script was good. I think it's a really good script, even from his lines. I just think that he didn't I just think he didn't work well with the words, or whatever approach he had with the words. It just didn't come through. So the overall performance was very lackluster for me. That whole scene where he's talking about his parents and the death of his parents and seeing his sister and all that in that moment, I was just kind of just watching, but there was just too much movement. He always looked scared, frightened. Even when he first walked into the room, into the opening scene, he looked very wide-eyed and open mouthed, and I was like, what's going on? Is there like a ghost in here or something? I mean, and it'd be different if it was admiration, right? This is Rothko, right? And it's like, whoa, right? He's got that face, and I don't know, you could play with something like that. I get the contrast that they were going for, where he is this, I don't even know if he was up and rising, like, because he said that he was a painter, but I get that he was this younger spry painter than Rothko, and that he had more energy and more questions and more of a curiosity and I guess shyness. And Rothko's like, hey, cut through the bullshit. But it wasn't executed. It wasn't executed that well for me. So that was my take on the performance. I thought a lot of it was just kind of repetitive and just revisiting the same sort of, I guess, frightened and like, oh no, I shouldn't say this. And I mean, maybe that's the core of the character, but it persisted throughout the entire thing for me. Even when he left, he looked scared. I mean, it didn't seem like there was any physical change. Mm-hmm. I'm sure whatever was happening inside was changing all sorts of places, but yeah, it didn't hit the mark for me.
Oh, fair enough. I mean, I'll say for me, I found Ken to be a very relatable character. That timidness I understood, because it reminded me a lot of first year university experience of when you're trying to impress the professors, you're trying to make that connection, you're seeing these higher people. It also reminds me of like when you're trying, like I remember the first time I ever met one of my idols, Tom Wilkinson, who, beautiful, brilliant man, original role Jean Valjean. I've watched him growing up. And so to be in a green room, sitting opposite him, or even when I got to work with Lucy Peacock for the first time, sitting in the rehearsal room with her, there was that timid, questioning nature the whole time of, what do I say? How do I act? I got that off the top with him, so I found that to be a very relatable. But I did find that beginning went on a little bit too long, and then there was such a weird sudden change to bursting out in anger about murder and fine and good, and art doesn't have to rip your heart out. Like, it just there wasn't that progression of comfortability coming between these two men, because like they worked together for 2 years apparently in the course of this play. So over 2 years, like even if Rothko doesn't really connect with him, there still should be some sort of quiet ease between the two, like that syncing up of, this is our routine every day. I don't have to be petrified every day of him. I kind of know his moods, how to predict him a little bit. We're gonna do this on a daily basis, that type of thing. So I didn't see that full evolution. It was kind of one end of the spectrum, and then the other end of the spectrum. There was very little
it felt,
connector in the middle. You know what I mean? It
felt disconnected when they spoke back and forth between one another. Like they were, I guess, acting to do two different people.
Yes,
is how it felt for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. I mean, Alfred Enoch, we still love you. Don't get us wrong.
I saw you in Harry Potter.
I called Alfred Molina grotesque, and Alfred Enoch, I'm like, he doesn't hit the end of his lines. Who are we? God forbid.
I was gonna bring that up when you brought it up. I was like, oh yeah, I'm not the only one.
All right, let's pivot away from some critiques and let's pivot onto some praise here. So, what was our favorite production or design element of this particular recording? Ryan, I'm going to start with you.
I'm glad you're going first, because I felt like someone was going to steal this one if I didn't go first.
Yeah.
The painting.
Darn
the
it.
painting in this play. Yeah. The paint being everywhere, and like I'm not even talking about just like this is a set choice or a costume choice, but the paint was splattered everywhere. This is a lived-in studio. the choreography of the painting scene is just stunning. I could watch that for days just on loop, because that is amazing. And that really, that scene, it gives the feel of just how much time has passed with these two people.
Yes.
That really, they have this like perfect synergy that they know exactly what they're doing. They've probably done this 100 times already, whereas we've maybe noted in the performance there wasn't enough change to feel this comfort that Ken is having with Rothko over time. But that scene where they're just gelling in their element is beautiful. And just really and then the fact that they're covered in what looks like, you know,
blood.
Macbeth poster blood all over their faces and bodies, and it is just this like strange, you know, Dionysian orgiastic moment that they like both are completely out of breath after and covered in what looks like blood is just jarring to look at. And just also speaking of the painting, and this is a big part of why I use this as my example for favorite production element, they recreated all of these Rothko paintings. Like those aren't the originals, I'm assuming. Like that is some stellar production design, whoever did that, some of which created partly in real time on the stage. But like whoever just painted all of these murals did a stellar job. Regardless, Ed, I know you are not a fan of abstract expressionism, but you could at least admire the craft of imitating what has been done here.
I can admire it. I certainly do, and I agree with Ryan. Like the painting, the use of the paintings throughout the space, how it was essentially a performer on the stage. Like every time I looked at these two, I took in that painting, and the direction was great, how they placed themselves in front of that painting during certain moments. But I mean, with abstract expressionism, I mean, I don't know how hard it would be to recreate those.
Like the designer's like 5-year-old nephew in the back, like.
Stop making me laugh. I don't know how hard it would be to recreate those. But I do love how they utilize those paintings. It didn't feel like a useless. It felt like a breathing space, like a breathing set. So yeah, just to comment on that, Ryan, I agree. It is commendable.
And then there's also the element of, over the course of the play, the black overtakes the red. The progression of the paintings like even if you don't like the way they look, you can admire the visual symbolism of Rothko's decline.
The symbolism, like it hit home. It was good. I really, because I thought they were going to keep going with the red getting a bit darker, black, but I like that they had that moment where they had the white canvas, just blank canvas on there, and it just connected back to what Ken was saying about cruelty. And one of the biggest things that Rothko speaks about in that moment, and as he's standing almost centered to that white painting or that white canvas, is about how people look at his artwork and see it as a child can do this, or they just depreciate what work he has put in front of them. And he just talks about the cruelty of people viewing his art, or I guess just people viewing art, how they're just not paying attention. And it's like all this work, all this passion goes into it. It's like, what, like how really cruel that must feel.
Yeah. I mean,
so I thought the set was amazing.
Yeah. I mean, the paintings kind of figure into mine, but my favorite element was the images they created in this piece between the two of them in the set, as well as the movement of the piece. Like so, for example, we mentioned about the canvas painting scene where they come out looking like they just committed mass murder on stage. Like, as Ryan said, it's such a striking image, and then to have Alfred Enoch covered in this red blood, basically talking about the murder of his parents. Like, it was just such a visceral image that just clicked. And then on top of that, the final scene where it opens with Rothko sitting like a child on stage with his hands in the red paint bucket, like almost going back to that finger painting primal spot for him, like and just that slow light coming in from the hallway hitting him. Like there were just so many of those beautifully like snapshots of a moment. Like it was,
Mac,
it was gorgeous.
Do you know? I mean, does anyone know how he died specifically?
Oh yes,
Yes.
I thought that was.
We are.
I thought that was going to be it as well. Yeah,
We
I
are
said to my
invited to
roommate
the
who I was watching with, I was like, oh, because I saw the dark lights, and I said to my roommate, I was like, oh god, he's going to be dead.
I had to look it up afterwards. I was like, how did he?
Yeah.
And then when that image connect, oh my god, I was like, oh,
And
that's
what's
such
beautiful about this is there's the line early on where they're talking about Jackson Pollock's death,
Yes.
and when
Yes.
Rothko calls it suicide and says, "When I commit suicide, there will be
Yeah.
no doubt." And Ken's like, "When? Not
Yeah.
if." And if anyone did know going in how, yes, Rothko did in fact commit suicide and was found by his assistant in his studio with his wrist slit, and then you see him in that moment. One, you're already thinking, okay, foreshadowing, regardless of
Yeah.
how this play
It's just like-
ends.
Yeah.
This is foreshadowing real life.
Yeah.
And two, then when you see that image of him sitting on the floor with the bucket, you're just like, oh no.
I just wish the paint in the bucket was more red.
Yeah, less
Was
water.
more
Yeah,
vibrant red.
Yes.
But also, there's more foreshadowing in there where they're going back and forth about the images that remind them of red.
Mhm.
And he
Mhm.
goes, a nick from a razor, or
Mhm.
blood from your wrists, right? And it's
Yes.
just
Yep.
it just kind of gets swept on by, and it's like,
Yeah.
whoa, this guy had some demons.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, so I just say there's some beautiful images as well as the scene transitions where they're moving the canvases around. Like, it was so well choreographed and so balletic. I just thoroughly,
It's red.
right? Well, no, just the fact that you have the water pour going on. There's so many well choreographed balletic moments where it's talk, not a lot of movement, kind of park and bark, yell at each other, and then you have these beautiful scene transitions of time and art moving through this 2 years time span. I just thought it was quite beautiful, the scene transitions, because scene transitions can be really hard. It would have been really easy for them just to
Yeah.
black out between each of the scenes, but the fact they kept the lights on and they just let the actors transition between the moments. Oop, we lost Ed. There we go. But yeah, so I would just say, yeah, the scene transitions were gorgeous, and some of those images they create, whether it's Alfred Molina sitting in the armchair in the opening, just staring at the canvas, the bucket scene at the end, or the mass murder canvas paint scene. I think those were some really beautiful shots. I also will say one of the images I really loved was when Alfred Enoch turns the lights on in the studio, and you
I
have
was
those
just thinking that.
like those phosphorescent lights flicker on. It was such a natural moment of seeing the space in an entirely different light. It was just beautiful.
And it was right after they were talking about how the wrong light can make it seem artificial,
Yes.
like the flats of a theater.
Yeah.
And then sure enough, meta theater going on here.
Yes.
Yeah,
They
exactly.
turn on the actual big theater lights, and
Yes.
you know what? That beautiful looking studio that they recreated does look pretty artificial when
Yeah.
you can see the flats.
Yes, exactly.
So yeah, great moment.
Exactly. Max, what was your favorite moment or favorite production element?
Well, most of it has been touched on already. I agree with everything that's been said. I think that a huge kudos has to go to the designer of this show. I mean, it's a gorgeously designed show, and I like I said, I agree. It feels so lived in. It feels so tangible. And I watched the play with my roommate, and I sort of was commenting throughout it, which I'm sure was incredibly annoying. But I do have just a little I love seeing plays that have working props, like a sink on stage.
Yes.
And every time they use that sink, I was like, yes! I was just so pumped about that running water on stage. But I will echo the stuff about the painting scene. For me, it felt so definitely theatrical. It felt so almost vaudevillian, the way their elbows were going in relation to their paintbrush.
Oh,
I just
yeah.
thought it was gorgeous. It was a really it made me miss watching live theater, because that's a moment that you just can't get on film. You just can't get, and obviously they do sort of get it on film, but it's just,
Except for that
so, yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's so theatrical. I was going to say also about the fluorescent lights, but more than just the fluorescent lights, I think I also actually, the blocking was fantastic. I agree with that as well. But more than just the fluorescent lights, the lighting design was so beautiful.
Mhm.
And I think so important because the opening of the play is this discussion of, as you guys all said, this what kind of light does art need to be seen in, especially Rothko's art. And that Rothko would get people to stand like 2 feet away from his painting and look at them and like all of these things. And so I thought that the lighting design, which is something that is often neglected in these discussions because we sort of say, okay, it's the design and then the lighting, but like lighting design really is an art in and of itself. And it felt so precise and so thoughtful in the way that Molina had this almost handheld, like this stand light that he could use, and then the lights would dim and brighten as sort of we move through the scenes in this way that Rothko has a little bit of control, but in reality, there's only so much control you can have over this kind of thing, and as ends up being the issue with the Seagram's paintings, the Seagram's murals. So yeah, I think that the lighting design specifically, I think, and that also ties into the paintings because you have that really fantastic moment where the light is shining through that one strip of the red, or the 2 strips, or whatever, and just like, because also there's this whole discussion in the play of, well, can a painting emanate, like, can a painting be luminous? And we find with clever design tricks that they can be. And that the paintings really do live. They do have this glow of their own.
That whole chapel, chapel recreation at the end.
Yeah.
When he's talking about the artist who had to go into this darker than the ocean, in the bottom of the ocean, and had to make this thing shine. And I just loved how at the end, it's just the painting, Rothko, and you just see it glowing as the lights just dim and get darker and darker. And I thought,
what I love about that too is like it's easy to get caught up on the translucency of the red, but it's the opacity of the black that really stands out to me.
Ooh,
because we know that there is an entire light back there, but none of it shines through the black. It is squandering this light, and as we discuss, it increasingly gets more consuming of the canvas, that we have less and less light to grapple with. We see the red in those moments the same way Rothko sees it, as the light to go toward.
Yeah, absolutely. I didn't even look at it that way, but now that I'm revisiting that scene, that is an amazing point that you brought up.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wonderful. Okay, well, let's move on to what we thought was the weakest part of the production. Ed wants to go first on this one.
The studio space was an amazing part of the production. It was also the weakest for me.
Okay.
And here's why. There's just too much on the stage. I think there's just too much. I'm not a big fan of, I guess, like Shaw-like plays where you have everything on the stage. Everything.
You were just in a Shaw play.
Yeah, but I agree with you. I agree with you 100%.
If I was directing it, it'd be a bit different. But I think all this play needed, all it needed, were those waiting, or those walls of canvased paintings, just waiting in there. I don't think it needed all the paintbrushes in the back, or the other flats behind the flat, or the details on the shelf or anything like that. Like, he only goes over the shelf once. I think it's just distracting. It makes me look for, okay, what's he going to go to next, right? It kind of distracts my eyes from what's really happening on stage or what's important. And I think, just too much detail on there. I think if they just narrowed it down to those paintings and the buckets and the paintbrushes, me re-envisioning this piece, if I were to do it, I'd probably just have like an easel and I don't know,
it works well as a minimalist.
Very, very minimalist. Like, I mean, that's what it works. It works well. Yeah. So that's my take on it. Everything else, I agree with the lighting. I agree with the use of the paintings and whatnot. But I think it was just a bit too much detail.
Ed, can I ask you a follow-up question? Because I want to stir trouble.
Yes.
What are your thoughts on running water?
Oh, come on. You can't hate on running water.
I wasn't going to bring it up, but when you brought it up, I was like, why? I mean, why? Just so he can clean himself off? I mean, what does that say?
You need
So
to
that,
clean him off,
just,
or else he's
so
gonna
that
have
there
red paint
can
all
be
over
running
the rest
water
of the
on
show.
stage.
I mean,
Just to make
it'd be-
Bert States happy.
It'd be different. It'd be different if. No, even then, it's. I don't know. It just.
Although I
doesn't speak-
bet you that they put it in specifically so that he could clean himself on stage.
I
Yes,
feel like that is
it's a
the
practical
functional use
Yeah,
for
100%.
that.
That's why they.
For that
Keep
being
in
on
mind,
stage.
these two, like we talked about the balletic transitions, these two are very rarely not on stage.
Exactly. Yeah.
When are they going to clean themselves?
Yeah.
Mhm.
I think they should have just stayed bloodied and red. I mean, why not?
No,
Use
I
it
would
on
like
it being
that.
a spate.
The next scene happens like 2 years later.
And on top of that,
Well,
Molina's
but-
coming in and out of the studio with like his overcoat on, like
Yeah.
he's going in and
He
out.
just
of
came
the
from
room.
the fancy restaurant.
So
in one scene.
in Kabuki theater, they have like minutes, like not even minutes, to change, to get the makeup redid, to do all that
That's
stuff.
true.
And they go back in there, they're running, they have a whole team, okay? So when I see that, I mean, then there's a whole documentary on it, okay? When I see that, I don't think
Fair
there's an
enough.
excuse for not getting cleaned off.
Yo,
This
when
red,
Kabuki
easily
comes into the
washable
discussion,
plate.
I can't even argue. You're right. You're
right?
100%. You're
I
right.
see that and I go, why can't it be the same caliber?
Kabuki's been doing the technical stuff better than American has for centuries.
Yeah,
Yes.
they're riding strong. So
Yeah.
But that's my take on it. Everything else I thought was fantastic, and even if there was a lot of detail on there, not to contradict my point, it didn't take so much away from the performance where I didn't enjoy it. I'm just saying that the weakest part of it was that there was detail, or a lot of it,
Fair enough.
if that makes sense.
Sure. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, sure. Why not? I mean, like, personally, I love the Logan set. I love that they created this entire Rothko world that just had all these little fun elements that made it because we don't get those sets these days anymore. A lot of times it's like a chair and a projection. It's like we
But we
lost
do in big
that
budget
art.
productions like this. We don't get it in our
Yeah.
Independent
but-
theater,
but-
yeah.
But like,
Note-
not
note
even
the
in the theater
distinction.
level, like just in regular large productions now, like I you're seeing this transition into more of a minimal set where you're losing all these beautiful pieces of set art that were created that were being made. Like the fact that like you have the original production of Les Mis that had the big revolve and the swinging in barricade and the beautiful bridges and things like that came through, and now we've reduced it to 2 staircases and like projections, and that's
But Mac,
all it
Mac,
is. But it's like there's a
I
beautiful
want you
art
to
that's
imagine-
lost.
Mac, I want you to imagine those red paintings, the one in the center, and everything behind it black.
Well, see, but this is what I'm saying as well, right? Is that it's your that Les Mis is
Mhm.
is in an operatic tradition, obviously,
True.
but it's also a lot of that stuff is also from a filmic tradition. It's theater trying to mimic film. It's theater trying to be ultra realist,
Mhm.
which this play does in a lot of ways,
Mhm.
but it doesn't lose its theatricality. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And so I think that.
Yeah.
Where we, especially with those minimalist plays, and I think the sort of modern, the contemporary iteration of Les Mis is a great example. Or
Yeah.
you look at Hamilton, right?
Yes.
Like Hamilton's set is a great example of this, where it retains a really, it's realistic in that it's textured and
Mhm.
layered, but it maintains a really essential theatricality to it,
Yes.
which is that it lets the audience imagine a lot more
Exactly.
of the
yeah.
story.
Yes, exactly. At least with the Hamilton set, not to go off on a tangent, but at least with the Hamilton set, there actually is something tangible on stage versus like a chair and a projection.
For sure.
Which
For
is
sure,
what
for
we're
sure.
going to so much more because it's more cost effective. These shows
Yeah,
are being
absolutely.
designed for tours. Like that's exactly why
Yeah.
we're seeing all these big shows now being designed in these more minimalist sets, is because it's less trucks to move productions around. It's less upkeep to go through. To have these that production of Red, to move that set into different theaters, the amount of work that would have to be done to do that on tour, like that's a lot of work and time to set all that up every time you go and tear it down and put it back up again. So I can see why people go that direction. I just think
And you're paying for it with the price of your ticket.
Exactly. But I just admire the art of these types of sets that like were on stage where you still get that bit of grandiose classic theater quality. But yeah, that's a bigger.
I see both sides of this argument because I agree that I do aesthetically I like the lived-in set, and I think I even commented on it earlier that it does feel like this is a complete world.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, I do think perhaps a more minimalist approach would be more consistent with the Rothko aesthetic.
True.
Because, if it was, like you're saying, just black in the background of all these paintings, it would kind of have more, or even black and red, various ways. You can still do interesting things with these two colors alone without filling out everything in such detail.
Mm-hmm.
So I see both sides. I don't want to choose.
I want to sort of say... I want to go a different direction with my least favorite part of this production. I might make a few enemies saying this, but I honestly think that the least compelling part of the production was actually the play itself.
Ooh!
I actually have some similar notes to that, Matt, so
I will.
The script doesn't do a lot for me. I thought that Molina and Enoch both carried their weight. I thought Molina, obviously, from our previous conversation, is just a compelling actor to watch. But like I said, I think the most compelling moments were the moments conducted in silence, or the moments inserted by a director. And I thought the language, a lot of the time, or not the language, but the actual play structure itself left a lot to be desired. I had not read this play before. I'd not seen it before, and I just heard a lot of things about it. I know a lot of people that really love this play. And I get why people love this play. And seeing the production, I think that, like I said, production design, direction, acting was all there. And when all that is there, it makes for a very good play, despite the fact that the script might not be, up to scratch. I just felt that there was a lot. The character of Ken, like you said, I think, Ryan, this play could be a monologue. Like, the character of Ken doesn't actually do anything. There's a lot of stuff that's, like, hinted at. That, like, oh, maybe there's this, like, lover, partner that he's on the phone with, and, like, oh, his parents were murdered, and it's never revisited. Like,
it's never revisited.
No, it's not
I'm
never
sorry,
revisited.
I shouldn't say that. It's revisited, but we don't actually get any development on that plot point. Like, there's no follow through on that plot line. I just felt, and I'll tell you the truth. Like, it's clear Logan wrote himself into Rothko, I think.
Yes.
Because of how well written Rothko is in comparison to Ken. But I also think that there's a real danger in that the language that Rothko uses becomes so dense, while at the same time being so I'm trying to think of the right word. Like, it's so self-inflating in a lot of ways. It can
pretentious.
Yeah, I mean, and there's this argument about pretension with Rothko, and obviously, like, Rothko was pretentious, and he was a bit of a a-hole.
Yeah.
But I think that there's not enough levity to make it worth it. Like, there are these, like, little quips that Rothko has where he's like, oh, I'm sad, but also angry. And I'm like, okay, great. But, like, I want to laugh a little bit in this. And I know that that's, like, it might seem like a shallow note, but I think that the fact of the matter is that in life, even in the darkest moments, we have to find the light, or else, the story is not worth it. You know what I mean? Like, if for art to mirror nature, there has to be that balance, or else it's just like, why do I want to see it? Like, I know Mark Rothko. I know he's pretentious. I know his story is super depressing. Like, what else is there besides that to make this play engaging? And that being said, that's a harsh criticism, and I do think that there is a great deal in this play that the actors built on and built really substantial characters on. But like I said, I think that was a lot of work here done by, first and foremost, the director, the dramaturg, the designers, and the actors to make the play. I have to say, I think to make the play the sort of really excellent play that it is. Excellent production that it is. Because it is an excellent production. I just I don't know if I'd listen to a reading of it.
Yes.
Max, we like you, man. We really like you. I think Ryan and I are gonna team up against you on this one.
Take your shots.
So,
take your shots.
well, okay, well,
I'm a figure.
I'll let
of
Ryan go
controversy, I
first.
guess.
Don't worry,
Well,
Max. I'm on your side on this argument here.
Yes.
Okay.
I'd love to hear.
Yes, Ed, you are very perceptive that I have been not that I don't see all your points, Max, and I respect where you are coming from with kind of each point you've broken down. I think my big kind of rejoinder would come more. I know we have a question later about Ken's arc that I think, I don't want to step on that too much in terms of, because I know I was the one who said earlier that I would watch a whole Rothko monologue show. That doesn't mean that I think Ken is superfluous in this one. I actually would argue he's the soul of the show, even if the fact that he is occasionally underwritten kind of occludes that a bit. But yeah, I want to hear what Ed has to say before I kind of.
So, I see where you're coming from, but like Ryan said, Ken is that hope that you were looking for in this piece. I think it's not a bit. I think it's the inverse. I think the writing is really good. I really like the writing. I really like the language used. I'm a big fan of big words and lots of syllables. But I think it's the other factors that didn't have that come across. I think it's factors with acting that doesn't have it land, where Ken is maybe the hope at the end of the tunnel, or maybe the direction. I think in the direction, I was going to add this to the weakest part of the production as well. There's a lot of pauses. And I mean significant pauses. And I think there should only be 2. I mean, at most 2.
In the whole show.
In the whole show, right? Just 2 in the entire show. And because the pauses that they take are, it becomes dead space. It doesn't, even the amount of movement that they put into it, it doesn't feed into the next, or at least that's how I perceived it. And the revisiting of Ken's story, it transfers differently. It's not, I don't think it's the most obvious way that it unfolds, because we have this where Ken lost his parents, and Rothko right off the bat, like right in the beginning, says, yeah. I'm not your dad, right? Yeah. But in a way ends up becoming something akin to, or even more than, a dad. Like, he becomes this teacher. And even if he isn't purposely trying to teach Ken something good, or even if what he's teaching isn't good, Ken does learn something at the end. And that's something that he does take away with him. I just think there are other elements with the production outside of the writing that maybe didn't have that land as powerfully.
I agree with you. And I'm not trying to say that Ken doesn't have a resolution or anything like that. Really what I'll say, and I am also, when it comes to song lyrics, when it comes to poetry, when it comes to anything other than contemporary theater, I agree with you. I'm a big fan of multisyllabic words. I love the lyrical nature of a lot of, that's what classical theater is built on. When it comes to contemporary theater, when it comes to theater spoken in our language, and I'm not saying like Shakespeare, that's a different language. Like that it might as well be French. He's writing in a different language. When it comes to that comment might get me some hate as well. When it comes to contemporary English, I'm a big subscriber of the old Ernest Hemingway quote that he said about F. Scott Fitzgerald, which is that he thinks that big emotion comes from big words, which is not true. I think that when it comes
Max,
to yeah,
let's take that moment right there, okay? You're just speaking about contemporary theater versus classical theater. Big words, big emotions. That quote. Does it not resonate with what Rothko was saying in the piece?
This is
that not applicable to
it is.
Right.
No, it is. But what I will. So here's the thing: is that yes, Rothko is an artist and he's a very thoughtful person, and his art is very complex and complicated. In the same way that any of these writers, their art, their mind might be very complex and complicated. But when we're discussing the basics of human emotion, no matter who you are, when it comes to expressing the deepest, most intense emotions, you're not going to be searching for that 3-syllable word.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to be speaking in language that is as simple and as easy to understand as possible, because it's not about you. It's about the person you're communicating to. And you need to get your point across. And now, obviously, there's exceptions to every rule. Art is a whole spectrum of things. Communication is a whole spectrum of things. But I do think that in those moments of real intense argument and anger, there's this such an, they talk about Rothko's anger so much. In those moments of anger, I don't want the flowery language, because it dilutes the anger. And anger, there's so many directors who would get mad at me for using the word anger, but like it's a secondary emotion, I know, but it's like those sort of really, really intense, vulnerable moments, those are big enough. The words don't need to be, I think, is where I'm.
Yeah.
And that is part of art being subjective. That's what I connect to.
That makes total sense. Everything that you're saying makes total sense. And that is a very contemporary way of looking at language within theater. And if we look at Shakespeare, he would say the opposite, where you need those words to convey, those big words or flowery words to convey this language. And the thing that connects this real world example is very much displayed in the writing of the script, when he talks about Fauvism or Cubism getting stumped out by abstract expressionism, and then art pop getting stumped down by abstract or I guess stumping abstract expressionism.
Yeah.
It's that sort of transference, that metaphor, that symbolism of the father, the son becomes father dies, right?
I think the play essentially dramatizes the very discussion we are having, in that Rothko is this classical figure trapped in a contemporary world. The dissonance that we are, clocking here, I think, is the design of the show.
Ryan,
for sure,
I'm glad Ryan waited, because he articulated what I was getting at.
That's a really and that is a really interesting point, and I do think that that's true. I think where I'm coming from is a purely technical standpoint, where I say, you're right. Shakespeare needs those big words to convey those big emotions, but we were talking about opera before. That's much more operatic, right? Mm-hmm. You need those syllables. You need those O's and those, long drawn out vowels to properly carry that emotion through the line. This is a different art form. Contemporary theater is a different art form. It's a different genre. Like you can't play folk music the same that you would play jazz, right? And so I just think that I agree with you that Rothko totally symbolizes this old world sort of sensibility. I mean, he even literally talks about being from the old world. But I do think that when it comes to the technicality of writing a play, I just want to see more attention paid to that. And like I said, it's a personal thing. Like, it's not like John Logan is like, what is Max what does Max want in a play? You know what I mean? Like,
Don't you think he respects your opinion?
oh God, I hope so. John, if you're listening, yeah.
You called Molina grotesque.
Yeah,
you called
I'm just
Enoch.
making enemies, man.
Hey man, you've already walked off the edge. It's okay. Usually I'm the one to do that. So.
Yeah, no, I'm glad I'm here to safeguard that. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'll say for me, what I think the weakest element was, and it's something that both the direction and the writing fell into, is that it became very formulaic in every scene. There was no variety between the scenes, and they all kind of just meandered together, where it's like, scene starts, somebody walks into the studio. They have a bit of a chit-chat at the beginning. Rothko, Alfred Molina, has a big outburst. Ken reacts to outburst. Rothko responds to outburst. Scene change. Like, it became.
But I think that's more. I think that hits more on the delivery than the writing.
But the writing. But if you look at the scene structure of every scene, they're written in a very similar structure every time. There's very little change in the scene structure of each scene. John Logan, like, I love the man. Like he's written some great films, like Gladiator. Funny enough.
Mm-hmm.
And
I didn't know.
Co-wrote Gladiator. He co-wrote it with William Nicholson.
Exactly. And I mean, I
Moses.
love Gladiator, but go watch Gladiator. There's some very repetitive plot points that show up throughout that film too. And I think part of and what happened was that the writing scene structure was very similar. So then the direction became very similar. Of Alfred Molina stands off. I think it's stage right or no. Stage left with the armchair. He barks at Alfred Molina or Alfred Enoch, who's always off on the record player. On stage right, I there was very because once again you're in one setting. There's only so many places you can move, but it became very repetitive after a while. Where the point was I actually had to split myself watching this over 2 nights because I was just like, okay, this is becoming really tough. I need a separation break. To kind of get through. To be fair,
though, I think in the blocking of it,
mm-hmm.
I agree with you that it can get fairly repetitive, and that
mm-hmm.
and that being said, there are a couple moments in the play that did take me by surprise and that I wasn't expecting. But I think what I'll say is in the blocking of it, it's hard to work in a space like that because there's not very much said, but that they actually found really interesting pictures on stage of just the 2 actors.
Yeah.
And I mean, it I think a lot of directors would go into that and say, oh, it's very easy because I only have to block 2 actors, but which is true. It is obviously easier to block 2 actors. Mm-hmm. It's much harder to do it well, I think.
Yeah.
Because you fall into that trap of just walk around and talk to each other and it basically looks okay. But they really did find a beautiful symmetry with each other. And I think
they did. I mean, their use of levels a lot when like, Rothko towers over Ken. There's some beautiful shots like that. And there are some really beautiful stand-up moments, especially when Ken starts fighting back against Rothko, that you finally start getting some really dynamic action around the stage. But for a lot of the time, it's like, park and bark. Park and bark. Like, and that's where, like, with this beautiful lived-in set where I was like, move around a little bit more. Like, move the paintbrushes. Like, engage with the space more. Make it like you're working around the studio. Because a lot of times, like we all know, being in rehearsal spaces, like they're lived in spaces, meaning you're moving around them, you're doing something in the space. It's same like an office space. An office space, you're moving around, you're working, you're moving papers, you're doing little everyday things. And if you're going for this naturalistic looking set, like instead of just using the transitions to build the canvas, during the scene, as they're debating, build something, move a painting. Do something a little bit more than just stage right, stage left, tennis match it back and forth here at each other. So I think for me, that was my weakest element, was just that after a while it became very repetitive to me, where I just went a little more variety. And I think that came down to the direction and the writing, because they both fell into their formulaic traps with each other. And when you're both falling into the same repetitive traps with each other, the rest of the piece, while Alfred Molina and Alfred Enoch both are fantastic actors, and they can only do so much with what they're given. They did really well with making their performances compelling enough to watch. But if you're sitting back watching it, because I've watched it three times. I watched it 3 times now. Like watching it 3 times, I went, okay, I'm starting to catch the same repetitive sequencing here in this.
I agree with you that it was repetitive. I just think the reasoning is inverse, where it was the delivery as opposed to the writing.
Yeah.
But I do agree at the end of the day, it did become repetitive.
Yeah.
Yes. Fair enough. All right, let's head into final remarks on this so far. And do we think this production hit the mark? Is it worth the watch? Max, you can start this one.
Yeah, I think it is. I mean, I think it's always a hard question because it always becomes a question of personal taste. But I think if you're interested in something really cerebral, really heady, something that is going to really make you listen, really sort of draw you in with the text, with the language, and you know you're interested in the argument of tradition versus sort of revolution in the art world. I think it's a show for you. If that doesn't, if that's not your cup of tea, then it might not be. But for me, I think given everything I've said, given all the criticisms, I love Alfred Molina. I thought Alfred Enoch brought it enough of the time to make the show very watchable, very engaging.
Mm-hmm.
And it's also, I mean, one of the big things is that it's not super long. Yeah. And so it lets you digest those more intense things a little bit easier because you're not sitting in them for as long as a Eugene O'Neill show or something like that. And so I do think that, yeah, I do think, yes, absolutely worth the watch.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. Ryan?
Yeah, I don't think I have much more to add to that. I loved it. I like the script and the production, so like I don't even have like a point of contention on one of those two main elements that I would think drag it down. I could understand why anyone wouldn't like this, but I encourage anyone who can to give it a chance because I think it is a very rich experience.
Wonderful. Ed?
I do not like abstract expressionism. Anything from Fauvism, maybe even post-impressionism onward, you're going to find it very hard to get me behind. But I do like this piece a lot. And I do think it hit the mark, and I do think it is worth a watch. I think anybody who watches it will enjoy it. Even if there are some elements that they don't enjoy about it, I think there's something that somebody can get out of it.
Fair. I think, even though I'm not familiar with a lot of other John Logan's plays, I think this, for the performances alone, it's a really compelling piece to watch. It reminds me a lot of like a 12 Angry Men situation where, once again, it's a lone room and it's a debate happening on stage between contemporary art and the classic older age art that they're coming head to head.
Just like 12 Angry Men.
Yeah.
Exactly.
It's 12 put into one.
Exactly. And I mean 12 Angry Men in the sense that like it's a one setting space and it's a debate between the two,
and it's
between two opposing parties. So
yeah, it is quite literally dramatizing the dialectic of 20th century art history in a very dynamic way that is it's captivating to watch.
If you like 12 Angry Men, get ready for one angry man.
One angry man and his friend.
And his buddy,
Not even his friend, his assistant.
His employee.
Yeah,
that's
one angry
right.
man and his employee.
You're my employee.
Yeah. Exactly. But yeah, very much I would highly recommend to watch this. Okay.
So I also like how we got through this question, and now I'm going to spoil it. We got through the does it hit the mark question without making a pun about Mark Rothko.
Now that we're on it.
Damn it, Ryan. All right, fair enough. Okay.
Did it hit the Marcus?
I'm respecting that we did it, but I could not let it go.
Fair enough. All right, so now we're going to head into our next section, which is more of a textual side of theater and this particular play, and we're going to deep dive a little bit more into that. So our first question is, do we agree with Rothko that to be a good artist, you need to be well-versed in philosophy, psychology, drama, music, history, and general theory of all kinds? Ryan, as a resident TA and academic of the group, and also as a playwright yourself, do you agree with Rothko?
Mixed feelings is what I'll say on this. well, one, I don't believe in absolutes when it comes to art of any kind. So to say that you must engage in the history of your field and other forms of culture to be a great artist, I think is fallacious. I do think great works do come out of that type of engagement, but other great works don't. And personally, I tend to be more intrigued by works that do engage with that tradition. Just I'm a sucker for intertextuality and tightly woven references and engagements, and just understanding a given art piece's place within the historical progression of its field and whatever given moment it is created. But I have pause with absolutist claims of this kind, that when dealing with something as subjective as art, to say you must have this, you must do this, because I know this might be difficult with the subject matter at hand, because there is debate in the room about whether or not there is merit to Rothko's work or Pollock's work or Andy Warhol's work, and like the actual moments in art history that we're tracing in this play. But I do think, I think theory and influences are useful, but not necessarily crucial. Somebody disagree with me?
I just will give you a flat yes. Absolutely, they're necessary.
Perfect. Ed?
Yes, absolutely. And I related to my own theatrical training, and not saying that I'm well versed in all of these subjects, but it is certainly something that I am trying to acquire, or constantly trying to obtain, or know. But when I look at theater of our past, like Commedia dell'arte, those actors needed to know history, philosophy, music, politics, whatever you name it. They needed to know that, right? When they were going from town to town acting, it is essential. It adds to not just the performance, but it adds to, I guess, a level of understanding for the technical qualities of a craft. So I do side with Mark Rothko in saying that, yes, you do need to be well versed in those things. It's just ironic that I think his work is
well. Can I propose a thought experiment on that point?
Sure.
To Max and Ed and Mac, if you were about to agree with them, you can comment too.
I'm in the middle, so I agree with both sides of the party here.
Okay, so Ed, you think that Rothko has all this foundation and still produce lackluster art.
Mm-hmm.
Alternatively, who's your favorite, let's say, actor, Ed? Name your favorite actor.
Laurence Olivier.
Sure, Laurence Olivier. You see this beautiful performance by another up-and-coming actor just as good as Olivier. Now, you and I both know that Olivier has that background, that training, that study. The new actor you just saw has none of it, but has produced work of comparable value. Do you change your opinion?
If I ever see someone who presents comparable value to that of Laurence Olivier without having the same degree of training or understanding, then I'm willing to I'm willing to tackle or deliberate more on my choice or my decision on that.
But
so
can I also
if it were the case, yes, I would. I would.
On that thought experiment, though, in that same vein, you're assuming, I imagine, that this actor has a knowledge of Laurence Olivier's performance.
Not necessarily for the thought experiment to work.
But, like, as someone who recently finished theater school, everyone has heroes, right? And whether or not they're the creme de la creme of the intellectual world or whatever, everything is building on something else. And so and we're just talking from a theatrical standpoint here, the purpose of theater is to reflect to a certain degree the human experience. I think it would be safe to say that you're going to, I mean, no matter who the actor is, you're going to draw from the experiences that are relevant to what you're trying to replicate. The larger your pool of experience to draw from, the more complex and multifaceted that performance is going to be. And so, for sure, you can get a good performance out of one person's singular pool of experience. That person might have experienced a lot. But just because you can get a good performance out of that one person's experience does not mean the performance of an actor who is learned in the theory of their craft, the theory of directing, the theory of dramaturgy, the theory of design, the theory of visual arts, the theory of music, does not mean that that performance is not going to be that much more multifaceted. Now, I agree with you that it's possible. Anything's possible, and you don't have to do anything. But like,
let me rephrase what I said, because I agree with both Ryan's hypothetical and I agree with what Max is saying, his perspective on that. If there was somebody who was comparable to Laurence Olivier without the training or the understanding and was able to sustain it throughout his career, then I would reconsider my conviction.
And I'll tell you the truth, the sort of depressing thing is that theater training specifically is becoming more and more anti-intellectual, not just not just unintellectual, but anti-intellectual. It's this tradition away from learning those key elements of the craft that at least I think they're key elements. And the pattern that I have seen is not a decrease in talent. Talent is still there. It's a decrease in nuance. It's people are, I think, actors, as has always been the case, are very good at the emotional stamina. That's an innate thing in a person that can be trained and can be nurtured and made more robust for sure. But that emotional stamina is crucial. But the nuance comes from the perspective, and perspective only comes from learning. And I mean, when it comes down to it, the essence of human nature is learning. I think you can talk to people on the artistic side of things and on the scientific side of things who will say that that's true. So if we don't utilize that in our craft, you can do it. You can do anything you want, but will it be the like I said, will it be the most nuanced version of what you can put out? And I would say 99.9% of the time that is not the case.
Mm-hmm.
I agree with that perspective.
Yeah. I think this entire discussion just becomes one of process over product. Mm-hmm. And why I bring up this thought experiment is I'm of the view that if the product reaches a certain caliber, I don't care how it got there. And we can argue that it won't reach that caliber if it doesn't take certain procedural steps to get there. But I don't feel like I'm in a position of aesthetic authority to say that such things are impossible. And that's where I totally agree with that. That is a very fair point.
Yeah. I mean, I'll say for me, I straddle the line on this where I go, I think to be any type of decent artist, you need to know the foundation of your art. So in the case of this play, Ken needs to understand Rothko's art and his history, so he can then understand why Pollock and whatever his name is, the other one,
Andy Warhol.
Andy Warhol, thank you, came along in that evolution
whatever that guy was.
Of exactly whoever that guy is, and that evolution of art. It's the same thing of understanding how medieval plays then became the Shakespeare plays, and then we move on from that into Oscar Wilde and Shaw. Like, it's that thing of you have to understand your roots so you can grow and continue to evolve the art that you are creating. I think that's what is really important in this. Like for example, I don't think you need to be somebody who has to be so intellectual that you know all about philosophy and psychology and all these other facets of things. I think that is a personal choice of what are you interested in that you can then bring in on your own research? What is
It's true.
mandatory across the board? And that's something that York University used to do really well in their theater studies program was, in the beginning of first year, you started with the Greeks and the Romans, and you worked your way up to modern day Canadian theater. It was this evolutionary road of understanding the foundation of theater. Now that program's changed quite a bit.
The perfect example of what you're saying is Impressionism. I mean, those artists who came out of that movement, who led that movement, understood the thing that they were opposing. They practiced in it. They trained in it. Until they
it gives you
acquired this level of understanding.
It gives you a level of respect for those who came before you as well, and a level of respect for the actual craft. Because I think that a lot of what is glazed over is, and a lot of people say, and since we're talking about theater, acting is a very easy thing to do, which is true. It's a very hard thing to do well.
Yes.
And so I think that when you study how it's like, LeBron James, how many game tapes do you think that guy watches of not just his past game, but games like decades in the past? Like, I mean, talk to Kobe Bryant, who watched every single one of Michael Jordan's games, right? It's about understanding the work that your predecessors did to allow you to do the work that you're doing now.
Yes.
I mean, there was a time when, as theater professionals, we would be considered as low as, the peasants in the, in Shakespeare's time, right? That we were, it was actors and sex workers were the ones who lived across the river, right? And that's not true anymore. It's a respected profession. Why is that? Well, it's because all of these people fought and advocated for it in the same way that, any movement, any art, any craft gains traction is you've got to respect the people that came before you, even if you don't like them. You've got to have respect for the work that they've done.
Yes, exactly. And I think that's more what Rothko was getting at with that opening debate he has with Ken, where he's like, well, do you know Nietzsche? Do you know Freud?
Yeah.
Do you, at least tell me you know Hamlet. Give me something from him. Like, at least know that bit of basics. Like, I think that's what he was going for with that. Was like, do you understand the foundation that you're standing on? So
what I think is the great irony, though, of that scene, whether it's intentional or not, but it's brought up in the context of Jackson Pollock. And to understand Pollock, you must have read Nietzsche's The Birth of Tragedy. And I don't know whether or not Jackson Pollock had read The Birth of Tragedy, but his public persona was the rugged American individualist. It had an anti-intellectual flair to it, regardless of whether or not he was personally anti-intellectual himself. So
that's a very American thing, and that's like we're a bunch of Canadians. So like, I mean, look at I brought up Ernest Hemingway. Like, look at Ernest Hemingway. He presented for sure something that some might call anti-intellectual, but that does not mean he was not. An
I'm not saying it was. I just.
Like Jackson Pollock, for all of his misgivings, was a very intelligent man. And so, like, I do think that that's an easy trap to fall into, is saying, okay, but this guy looks like, and presents this. I mean, the perfect example is Marilyn Monroe, who was this blonde bombshell sort of sex icon. But that woman was so well-read and so intelligent and so well spoken that, like, it's and that really is, I think, a lot of what theater is based on, is presenting something that is very to the eye simple, right? But underneath it all, that's the essence of humanity, is we're more than meets the eye, right?
So Max, I agree with you, and thank you for correcting that, because I was not trying to make a knock on Jackson Pollock's intelligence.
I don't think so.
But much like Hemingway, and I'm glad you brought up that example, because much like Hemingway, the appeal of this, like, uniquely American 21st century art is that it is comprehensible to the public,
for sure,
in a way that the persona that these men were imbuing into their work and their public lives was so unpretentious that they would never demand their audiences read Nietzsche to understand their work, the way Rothko is to Ken's engagement with Pollock's work.
That's very valid. That's very
what true. I would tell people to go out and watch? You should watch Ian McKellen break down his Macbeth speech.
Yes.
It's a great,
and
for
he
sure.
even says it. It's like the audience may not get this, but it is something that, I don't know if he says it is, but he says it's something important that an actor should try to figure out for themselves or whatever. But he has a whole workshop on it. It's very, very interesting to watch.
Yeah. Wonderful.
Oh, another example. I think this is a pretty fun example. I wouldn't know how much I don't like abstract expressionism if we didn't have neoclassicism, right? Classicism.
Classicism.
I will say though, also actually,
Did I say it
it's
right?
funny that you should say that because there's a lot of people who wouldn't know what abstract expressionism is without this play. And that, I mean, I think this play is a perfect example of why these things overlap.
Wow,
this play is
universal.
a play, right? Like it's so meta, but it's, you know, this play is a testament to respect between artists, I think.
Yeah.
Kind of makes you think about how good the writing is, right, Max?
yeah.
Oh,
Sure.
we're not going back down that rabbit hole, boys. We're moving forward. Okay, so I move on to the next question then. So, is Rothko's firing of Ken at the end of the play a positive or negative thing for Ken and his future as an artist? I'll go ahead and start this one. Why not? Since we're not, I'll jump in at this one. So I think it is a necessary positive step for Ken to be let go of by Rothko. It's that moment of where Rothko realizes what's happening to the art world, and he goes, "I gotta push this kid out of the nest some more. Like he's been with me now 2 years, and in order to keep him as an artist moving forward, you have to release this person from the nest of the studio where he's being confined these last few years learning from Rothko." It's that necessary evolutionary step of you go to theater school, you learn your craft from your professors, and then it's like, okay, now go. Your 4 years are up. Like go out into the world and go and learn and go and continue to expand yourself. But you've done the first step here. Move on. Like I think it's.
I love how we can't talk about painting without putting it in theater terms. Like,
well, I'm not a visual artist. I can't help it. I'm not a visual artist.
Time we've done this.
But like, I mean, York has a great visual arts program. I'm sure at the end of 4 years of visual art at York, professor like they graduate. So it's that thing of you've done your learning there. Now it's time to move on to your next step. Whether that's going on to do your master's, going on to go work at an art gallery, whatever. It's that necessary step of time where it's like you hit the pinnacle of where you're going to get with this step. You have to move on to the next step. And with Rothko, with him realizing where he is in his life, and that okay, I've now removed my paintings from the restaurant. What else am I going to give this guy to learn? What am I going to do? Like, it's that thing of he's beginning to realize that time is really marching on from him with Pollock, with, I keep forgetting his other name.
Andy Warhol.
Like Andy Warhol and Pollock are currently the future of art. He is the last.
Pollock's dead by this point.
Yes. Well, yeah. Well, they are the future. He is now the last remains of his generation of artists. Like, it's that thing of you have to move forward, Ken. You can't keep debating with me in the studio all the time. You have to move out of the nest and onwards. So I think it's a very positive step.
Can I jump onto that? Since this is what I didn't want to talk about in defense of the playwriting earlier.
Mm-hmm.
This is a play about an abusive relationship. Mm-hmm. Let's not mince words about that. I think there's a lot going on in this play, and it's easy to kind of miss that. Mm-hmm. But Rothko is not Ken's friend.
No.
Which I think doesn't necessarily... There isn't a spotlight that's put on that. Ken has the moment where he's like, do you know if I'm married, dating, queer? Do you know anything about me? And like, he's starting to notice it, but then still wants to work with him and still wants to help him. Like, this is a cycle of abuse that I think firing Ken is the one good thing that Rothko does in this entire play. Mm-hmm. And it maybe doesn't feel like at the time for Ken, but this whole play, Ken's arc does, like you're saying, Mac, it is about breaking free from Rothko, something that I find really interesting about this play is we never get to see Ken's painting.
Right.
We don't. I love that scene where there's like building up to the dramatic, moment. Is he going to show it to him? And he walks out, and that's the last we see of it.
Mm-hmm.
And I would wager, because we don't get to see it, but being someone who paints the people who murdered his parents or his imagined vision of what they are, I'm guessing that Ken's painting is nothing like Rothko's. There is no human form in Rothko's art.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, what redeems this play, this like bygone era in which Ken gets to leave and thankfully isn't there to find Rothko's body dead on the floor, is that I don't think he has any more to learn from Rothko by the end of this. He is making different art, different kind of work, and he's learned maybe discipline, maybe some philosophy. He's gotten a pretty interesting reading list from this relationship.
Mm-hmm.
But after a certain point, it's easy to kind of find your mentor, your master, and think that this is someone I will never achieve the level of greatness of, and I have to spend my whole life copying them until they eventually die, and then I become them. And that is the only way. It is this kind of like Freudian, Jungian, kill the father kind of idea. But what I think this is a very happy ending for Ken, that he gets this freedom. I would have maybe preferred, my one kind of ding on the playwriting is I would have maybe liked to have that be his choice, as opposed to Rothko making that choice for him. But I do see it as this positive conclusion of his story and his ability to, take the proper lessons from this, however many years it's been experience.
Fair.
I mean, I think you guys put it really well, and it's a hard question to answer, and I actually didn't have a good one, but listening to you guys, I think I would agree that it is a good thing for Ken, but I like the sort of allusion to, like, he escapes the death of Rothko. Mm-hmm. He actually doesn't, and I think that this interesting thing in that Rothko is the light, and Rothko is the painting, and Rothko is the darkness as well, and that as this darkness slowly creeps in, enveloping everything. That's the thing about the darkness, is that it envelops everything, not just the person who is sort of emanating it, generating it, that Ken actually gets to escape the darkness, which he one might argue has also been living in his whole life. And I'll tell you the truth, this is part of the reason that I would have loved more of that plot line in the play, is that I because it is a two-hander, we get a lot of Rothko's light and darkness, and I think that if I knew what Ken was running from a little bit clearer, then that exit would be a bit more impactful for Ken, because I think that his leaving is very it's a thing about Rothko. Rothko's now alone, but we don't really know what happens to Ken, and so it's a hard question to answer. But I agree with you guys. I think that,
and let's also remember that Ken found his parents dead on the floor as a child. So I have a bit of a headcanon with this play that the suicide happens maybe a few days after this final curtain, because, and I think part of what makes this the one good thing Rothko does in his life, essentially, is saving Ken from that trauma and having to repeat that, and recognizing that he didn't want to be Ken's father. He's not going to be Ken's father again in the darkest moment that could be.
Right.
Fair enough. Ed, any final thoughts on this?
I think it was positive for Ken.
Mm-hmm.
I agree with that it was positive for Ken, for him to go off and blossom. And I don't think it was ever supposed to be a happy ending. I think anybody who watches this play can see that throughout the play, they kind of hint towards the end where it is going to be black. Mm-hmm. All this red is going black. Mm-hmm. So that, yeah, I do think it was positive for Ken to get out of there to learn from his idol, to see the degradation of that idol, and so that's all I have to say on it. Wonderful. I think you all pointed out some really awesome perspectives on that.
Wonderful. Okay, final question. How do we think the play portrays Rothko? Does it paint him in a positive light? Is this a caricature or a full portrait of the man? Ed, you're giving me some funny faces here, so why don't you start us off?
I don't know the man. For all I know, he could have been a caricature. I mean, how he speaks about Pollock and how it's very fantastical, and he was this sort of almost like a fictitious character going out doing all this. Oh, you would have loved Pollock and all that stuff. I think for sure that he's definitely a caricature. My problem with caricatures is that oftentimes they're acted as real, or there's a real approach to them. I think there's a lot more to game when you don't approach it if you approach it with more imagination than reality. So that's just my eye rolling with the caricature, but I definitely think it's a caricature of the man.
Wonderful. Max?
Can I? No.
Oh, sorry, Ryan. Do you have something to?
No, Max, go ahead.
I was just going to say that I agree, and I think that this is giving John Logan maybe a bit too much credit, but that we sort of get Rothko as the Aristotle to Logan's Plato in this sort of the sort of death of Aristotle sort of way, in that Plato
Socrates?
wrote. Oh, I'm sorry, Socrates. And that, no, you're absolutely right. I was like racking my brain. I was like, man, I hope I get this right. Such an impressive reference. But I in that sort of, I think we see certainly a version of Rothko that is very realistic and has a lot of realism to him, but that I think is a lot of what Logan wants to say. Rothko says what Logan wants him to say, and so that we are getting the voice of the writer, but through the mouth of Rothko. And I think that those are two important sides of the character that coexist, but are not. One is not, I think, necessarily more important or more significant than the other.
Yeah. Wonderful. Ryan?
So I have a complicated answer to this one. Shocker.
Oh.
Have you met me?
No.
The character is portrayed as a caricature here. But I think this is something that I can't tell if it's inherent to the script or if Molina's excellent performance is what brings this out. But regardless, I could definitely see a lesser performer bungling it up.
Yeah.
Is that the version of Rothko we are given here? And again, I never met the man. I know of him just through art history. But the version we are presented with in this play is someone who desperately wants to be a caricature without realizing that it is a caricature. He has this well-crafted image of himself that he presents, to everyone. He's alone in his studio with one other guy, and yet he cannot turn this off. This, I am I am the Apollo, essentially. And he has this like well-crafted persona that I mentioned at the very beginning, that we see the cracks in it, and I think that is testament to Molina's performance. But what Logan is giving us here isn't, yep, this is what Rothko was like. What an amazing, well-spoken person. He's showing us what it's like to let your public persona become your selfhood, and what that does to a person. And I think this is a very human story about someone who is suppressing their humanity for their artistic ideals.
He tried to live behind his mask.
Yeah. Very good. I mean, I'll say for me, I think because of the setting of this play and just the limited time span we're seeing of Rothko, this isn't a full portrait of the man because we're not seeing him outside the studio. I mean, he mentions he has a wife. I mean, we know he had a family. And we know Alfred Molina, when he wants to, like the earlier scenes of him as Doc Ock in Spider-Man, he can play really endearing, loving husband if he wants to. But with this, because we're trapped in this studio with him, this one span of time, you're not getting this full, rounded picture of who Rothko was. You're getting a very zoned in, microscopic look at this man. And I think Max, as you said, this is very much John Logan's voice, maybe not so much Rothko's voice. Because I mean, I haven't watched any interviews with John Rothko. I haven't read many interviews with John Rothko Mark Rothko, to get a full picture of who he was. So I think that once again, this is it's almost like a sketch of Rothko with like a little bit of it shaded in a certain spot where it's like, here's the one spot we chose to focus on this bigger sketch of this artist of a man.
See, I would agree. I just don't know if the goal of a play like this is to show the whole man. I think, well, and I think it's really showing the version of Rothko that Rothko wanted us to see, and the great artistry of at least this production, but maybe the play as a whole, is that Rothko doesn't realize that it's an ugly picture, that it is grotesque. And I think that is the beautiful tragedy of this piece.
I have nothing else to add. I think that's a wonderful nail on the head there, Ryan. Yeah. Okay, folks. Well, that's it for this review. I mean, we've hit the end. So before we all go, why don't we all give our social tags? Max, as our leading guest of the show, where can people find you and your work?
People can find me at Mackerman12, Mackerman12 on Instagram. You can find my theater company, Dandelion Theater, at that handle on Instagram. We're on Facebook. We're on Twitter. And I work for the wonderful Assembly Theater, which you can find by that handle on all platforms. It's a hard time for theater folks right now. So if you can support the independent theater in Toronto, do it. If you can't, we love you anyway. And justice for Breonna Taylor.
There you go. Well said. Ed.
So you can find me at Edmund_Clark_official at Instagram. So I have to think about all those underscores. Maybe I should change that. And just to add to what Max was saying, right? Support the independent theater companies. Speaking of independent theater companies, we just released that Cup of Hemlock, Man of Destiny by George Bernard Shaw. And you can see me playing Napoleon. So if people watched this review and said, oh, Edmund doesn't know what he's talking about, which I most likely probably do not, feel free to comment on that performance and check it out, please. All the best. Thank you.
Wonderful. Ryan, give us your usual sign off.
You know my usual answer. I'm not active on social media. The only
Don't
one
do
I'm
it.
On, the only one I'm on is Facebook, and I don't want friends requests from strangers. So just throw all that love to Cup of Hemlock or Dandelion Theater, if you would. And let's support our friends in this community. There's no reason for us to be competitive. Let's work together and support each other's arts.
Yes.
And also justice for Breonna Taylor.
Well,
since you brought it up anyway.
Give to those organizations as well.
Yes.
If you can.
Yeah. Wonderful. I'll say for me, you can find me at all social media platforms at Mackenzie Horner. You also can follow my podcast, Before the Downbeat, on all social media platforms. As of this recording, when it comes out next Wednesday, we will be just about to release our episode all about the controversial musical Carousel by Rodgers and Hammerstein. Let's just say that spawned a lot of debate. So it's a good episode. So be sure to tune in for that.
I like that beard stroke, Max.
Yeah,
it's important.
Other than that, everybody, thanks so much. We raise a cup to you, and we will see you with our next Broadway HD. Be sure to subscribe to them because they have a wonderful canon of material for you to watch as well. So thanks, everybody. We'll see you next time. Bye.